she mentioned her name was Rahma bint Ibrahim, and that she had a husband who was a poor carpenter. His livelihood was by the work of his hands, and his provisions came to him day by day. And what he earned was never more than what she needed for her feeding her family, and she had given birth to a number of children for him. And so we see here that this is an ad in the past, that many people, they work that which is sufficient for them. Because the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he mentioned one hadith, خَيْرُ الرِّزْقِ كَفَافًا, the best of provisions, that which is sufficient. And the Rasulullah himself used to make dua, asking Allah to make the qut, means the provisions of Al Muhammad, to make the provisions of Al Muhammad quta, means sufficient for them, enough to take care of their needs. So it's not surprising that people of the past, they used to be this way. However, he mentions that there was a man named Al-Aqta', who was the king of the Turks at the time. And he used to come to the town, and she said that the river between where they lived and the next land had frozen. And when it froze, people used to come. So this man, he brought 30,000 horsemen with him, and the people of Khawarizm called him Kasra. Abu Abbas said that Aqta' was an extremely unjust blasphemer, means non-Muslim, with a strong enmity towards Islam. And he'd been troublesome to the people on the borders, and insisted on capturing the people of Khawarizm and killing them and raiding them. And the governor of Khurasan used to appease him and his like among the leaders of the non-Arabs to minimize their harm on the citizens and their bloodshed of the Muslims. And they would send each one of them money and different things, fine clothing, in order to appease them. Means instead of engaging with them in war, out of fear of many deaths. So one year he said, this man who was disrespectful to the ruler, the Muslim ruler, and I didn't know why he was this way. Means this non-Muslim ruler was disrespecting the Muslim ruler. And I said, you're thinking, were the gifts late? Or did he consider that which they were sent to him to be inferior? But what happened was he came with his army and blocked the roads. And he killed and he maimed and committed corruptions and atrocities. The horsemen of Khawarizm were unable to defeat him. And the news of the attack reached Abu Abbas, Abdullah bin Tahir, rahimahullah. So he dispatched 4 commanders, Tahir bin Ibrahim and Mudrik, Yaqub bin Mansur bin Talha, and Mikhail Mawla Tahir, and Harun and Qabid. And he loaded the town with soldiers and weapons in arrangements in 4 corners of the regions in order to protect the land. And he protected the women by the will of Allah. Furthermore, the valley of Jehun was at the highest peak of the river of the Balkh, which also froze over due to the weather. And it was a great river, and was very treacherous and destructive to the crops. When the river expanded, its width would be about 3 miles. And if it would freeze over, it would become level surface, and nothing beneath it could be reached unless you dug a hole, the way people dig for wells. And I've seen the thickness of the ice 10 handspans. And I was informed that in the past it would exceed 20 handspans. And when it freezes, it serves as a bridge for the people of the area, so the soldiers, they packed animals and the caravans would pass over it. And so what was between 2 banks became arranged. Sometimes it would remain frozen for 120 days, and if in the year the cold would be less, it would remain for 70 days to 3 months. The woman then said that the blasphemer, means the disbelieving ruler, he crossed over with his horsemen to the door of the fortress, and the people sought refuge in the fortress and gathered all their belongings. So they attacked the Muslims in the morning and harmed them, and so the people of the town were detained inside, like a siege. And they wanted to go out, but the Qadi prevented them until the soldiers of the Sultan and the volunteers who were fighting to defend the Muslims came. And so some young men came with whatever they could carry of weaponry to defend the land. And they attacked the disbeliever and his army. And so the disbeliever and his army pretended to retreat and pulled them back from the buildings and the walls. And when they got outside, then they returned again and they attacked the Muslims in something like a forest area. And they sought cover and took structure to fight against them. They were separating from the fortress and help was far away from them. They battled the most severe battling, and they stayed firm until their bowstrings popped and their bows snapped. And the tiredness reached them, and they were touched by hunger and thirst. And most of them were killed, and the rest were inflicted with severe injuries. When the night came, both factions fell back. The woman said that the fires were lit on the mountain tops the hour that this disbeliever crossed over, and the signal reached Jurjaniya, which is the largest city in the outskirts of Khawarizm, where Mikhail Mawla Tahir was with his army. So he rushed to respond to this situation in reverence for the Amir Abu al-Abbas Abdullah bin Tahir, rahimahullah. So he ran to the area, the city, Hiza Rasib, in day and night. And he traveled what would be 40 miles or so, or 40 plus miles or so. He said a disbeliever decided to wipe out a small band of young men who were fighting to defend the land. And when that was in progress, the black flag showed up, means the Muslims. And they heard the sound of the drums, so they retreated, means disbeliever and his army. And Mikhail reached the battlefield and buried the dead and carried the wounded. The woman said the evening had come, and 400 funerals were prayed in the fortress. There was no house except there was a dead person. And then they carried this person and they buried them. He said it was a widespread tragedy, and the whole region shook with crying. And she said, my husband was placed in front of me dead. So I was overcome with extreme sadness and crying as a young man would cry over her husband. And the father of the children, and the father of her children, and we had dependents. And the woman and the family and neighbors gathered to help me through this difficult situation. The children came, and so would, and the babies as well. And they had no concept of the issue. And the children, they asked for bread, and I did not have anything. And then my chest became tightened by the situation. Then I heard the adhan of Maghrib, so I went to resort to the prayer. And I prayed with what my Lord ordained for me. And then I prostrated supplicating to Allah, and I was beseeching Allah, the Exalted, asking Him for patience and for Him to amend the orphanage of my children. Then she said, after I finished the prostration and the prayer, I fell asleep immediately. And I saw myself in a dream as if I was in a beautiful land with many stones. And I was looking for my husband. A man called me, where are you going, O free woman? And I said, I'm seeking my husband. And he said, go to the right. I saw a level land, and it was fragrant and had plenty of greenery. And behold, there was palaces and buildings that I was unable to describe, and the likes of which I have never seen. And there were rivers flowing on the face of the earth without banks. I ended up at some people who were sitting circle by circle, and they were wearing green clothing, and they were engulfed in light, and behold, there were the people who were killed in the battle, eating from the food laid in front of them. I started going between them, examining their faces, so that I would meet my husband. However, he saw me and said, O Rahma. So I followed the voice, and behold, he was in the same situation in which I saw the other martyrs. His face was like the full moon, and he was eating with his companions that were killed in that battle. And he said to his companion, this poor woman has been hungry all day. Do you permit me to give something to her to eat? And they permitted him. So he gave me a piece of bread. And she said, I knew at that time that it was bread, but I don't know how it was made. It was whiter than snow, and milk, sweeter than honey and sugar, and softer than butter and fat. And I ate it, and when it settled in my belly, he said to me, go. Allah has given you sufficient food and drink for the rest of your life in the dunya.